Well, stop me if you heard this before. U.S. President Donald Trump put Canada in his crosshairs today. Twice he made threats against his northern ally. The CBC's Katie Simpson joins us now from Washington to talk about the latest from the Trump administration. So what now? Katie, tell us more about the latest Canadian comments.
Well, he did it on both the world stage and he did it in the Oval Office for a domestic audience. Donald Trump had a couple of public appearances today. One, speaking to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and he talked generally about protectionist American policies trying to push companies to build or create jobs and set up manufacturing plants in the United States, or else look out, tariffs are coming. And he also singled out Canada, talking about how, again, he said this before, but he talked about how, listen, we don't need their cars, we don't need their lumber. He said this before, and he talked about Canada becoming the 51st state because he's frustrated about the trade imbalance, as he describes it. There is a trade deficit, there is a trade deficit, but Donald Trump often mischaracterizes it, and it's largely because Canada sells more energy products into the United States. So that was one thing that certainly got a lot of attention in Canada because, of course, Donald Trump has threatened or suggested, floated the idea that he could impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, thinking about February 1st. So that's just over a week from now. And so anytime Donald Trump talks about it, everyone in Canada, of course, is looking for more information, more insight, or something official. And then he was in the Oval Office signing a series of executive orders today. And this issue came up again. Listen to the question from the reporter. And hear what he had to say.
Is February 1st the date for Chinese tariffs as well, sir? February 1, or was that just Mexico and Canada?
It's Mexico and Canada, but we're talking about China too. Look, China's sending us tremendous amounts of bad drugs, fentanyl, really bad stuff. Most of it comes through Mexico. We'll have to stop it with tariffs.
So if Donald Trump is going to go ahead with this plan to impose these tariffs on Canada, I'm told by a senior Canadian government official that no one officially from the new Trump team has actually indicated to Canada specifically that that's going to happen. Doesn't mean it won't happen. Want to be very, very clear about that. And what the official tells me is, sir, we have... There's a mouse. David, I know
oh, no.
but there's a mouse. And, sorry, it's so
You're making me nervous now.
No,
I'm
it's all good.
Lift your feet up. Lift your feet up.
Well, here's the thing. I've been deployed. I've covered war. I'm not afraid of a mouse, but doesn't mean I like it.
Doesn't mean you're not distracted by it either.
Doesn't mean I don't like it. So, anyway.
Okay. All right. So it doesn't mean it will happen. Doesn't mean it won't happen. Yeah.
Doesn't mean it won't happen. Tariffs are. This is like the most important thing right now for the Canadian economy. So I don't want to be like distracted by a mouse while we're having this conversation. But but it doesn't mean it's not coming. But in terms of, has anyone from the Trump team officially said to Canada, "Hey, this is happening. Here it goes"? No, that hasn't happened. Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister in Canada, had a conversation with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I'm told by a source that he didn't say that directly there. Canada continues to do outreach to push the advocacy case. But in terms of, has anyone officially given Canada some sort of indication that, okay, yes, this is actually a thing? It hasn't happened yet. But again, that doesn't mean it won't happen.
Right. Is that the mouse behind you? I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Listen, so we know it's live TV, Kitty. Okay, look, mice in your newsroom, tariffs on the table, but an agenda that tariffs haven't come fast, but a whole lot of stuff has come fast from Trump. Executive orders just at a flurry. What did he do today?
Yeah, so sort of the biggest headline in the moment right now down here, and it changes hour by hour, is that one of Donald Trump's new executive orders was challenged by a court, and it has been temporarily paused. Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday to ban birthright citizenship, and that is, if you are born in the United States, you are automatically granted American citizenship. He signed an executive order to end that long precedented policy. And that has been challenged, and a judge described it as unconstitutional. So the legal battle there begins. Donald Trump vowed to push for that. We also saw Donald Trump sign some executive orders this afternoon in the Oval Office. That's where that clip came from. He talked about trying to create an AI hub in the United States, sort of repealing some of the guardrails for the private sector that Joe Biden had created around artificial around artificial intelligence. He also
It's back, isn't it?
Yeah, the mess is back. sorry. You know,
All right.
it's okay.
All right. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
He talked about that. One other thing. I know that you're going to run out of time. One other thing. He signed an executive order to declassify information around the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK. Don't know how quickly we're going to get those details, but that's something certainly. Who knows what's in there?
Okay, Katie, if you want to get rid of the mouse, put a 25% tariff on the mice. Solves everything. That's Katie Simpson in Washington with her mouse. Thanks.
Thanks.
If he does move forward on tariffs on Canada, as he has said, whether it be back on January 20th or on February 1st or February 15th as a Valentine's Day present, or on April 1st, or whenever he says he's going to do it, as he keeps repeating, two things will happen. One, Canada will have a strong, robust response, because we don't want this, but we will respond if necessary. And two, prices for American consumers on just about everything will go up. And we don't think he wants that.
Okay, the power panel is back to tackle this one. We've got Jonathan Kalis, James Moore, Andrew Thompson, and Shachi Kurl. Andrew, let's get you to start it off. I mean, Trump's math keeps kind of changing, kind of his reasoning keeps changing, but the threat remains ever present even as the date changes. What do you think?
I think we're actually getting more clarity on what he's driving towards. If you read the executive order as it came out, if you look back at the papers his economic advisors have been presenting, there's two big issues that keep coming up. One is a concern that the American dollar is overvalued and the Canadian dollar is undervalued, and this is providing an unfair subsidy to Canadian business. This isn't exactly new. We think we've known this for some time in Canada. We worry about the low dollar because it masks a productivity problem. But that's the big piece that seems to be in his mind. And in fact, if you look at the number, why pick 25%? Well, that's about the currency differential. And so by putting the tariff in, you almost immediately move those two currencies back to par. And he talks about that in the 21st, in his 51st state, mumbo jumbo that he gets into. That seems to be one of the big issues. There's a lot in his, in his executive order talking about currency manipulation from other countries. So that's one piece. Second is that you listen to that list he just read through. This is the same list we've seen since, 1984, 1988, that keeps coming up. It's lumber, it's dairy, it's the energy sector. There's also all the other protected pieces that have been built in. There's the IP protection pieces around pharmaceuticals that keep Canadian drugs cheaper than American drugs. There's the protection of the financial sector, protection of the airlines. All these are areas that Americans want to reopen. So what he's pushing towards, I think, is trying to force NAFTA back to really the very, very start. So the next agreement won't be an incremental one. It'll be foundationally different. That seems to me to be where he's going. Of course, in a very Trumpian way, he's going to break a lot of stuff as he goes along. But that seems to be kind of what he's pushing towards.
You know, Shachi, he laid all this out today. The World Economic Forum in Davos, which is going to fry the brains of a certain part of his base, but that's also a part of the Trump world. I mean, what do you make of this? Like, the Doug Ford has been going to the U.S. to say we need to deliver the message and be on Team Canada, and now his response seems to be, I'm going to have an early election. I know you've talked about your polling saying that in Ontario, showing strength against Trump, the appetite was strongest there. But does calling an election show strength or opportunism? What do you make of that response?
Oh, gosh. Gee, I wonder, David.
It could be both,
two things can be true at the same time without our heads exploding. Yes, is Doug Ford taking a moment to absolutely exploit the 2 weeks he's had as Captain Canada? Sure he is. Was he going to was he going to be in a fairly strong situation 3 months from now, 6 months from now? My guess is probably, but he's decided to go now. Maybe not the most helpfulest thing to be doing in terms of that persona that he wants to project, and also in terms of the work he needs to be doing south of the border with those bilateral conversations that he is going to be having with the governors of a number of states where he's got those relationships in order to say, say, hey, senior senators, hey, governors, hey, big city mayors, maybe you have something to say about the appetite for oil and lumber and vehicles. I couldn't help but be struck not only by the cognitive dissonance of Trump being at Davos of all places, but also, here's a leader who likes to pepper his rhetoric with how he doesn't like it when people sound whiny and he doesn't like it when people sound complainy. And there he is whining about, unfairness and whining about how we're being so tough on him. And I don't know. Maybe it's just, it's nothing for policy, but it was a moment where I'm like, really? Now this is your rhetoric? This is what you're going to say? And, if somebody wants to get under his skin or needle him on that front, they may do well to point that out.
Jonathan, maybe I'm making the mistake of trying to do rational analysis of it, right? Because the number on the subsidy to Canada, it seems to be a combination of the currency gap that Andrew talked about, the trade deficit, the lack of defense spending, maybe that gets added in there. The oil, it seems to be a bunch of things bundled together. But maybe that's just what I'm drawing from. Like Daniel Smith talked to him and says he wants to buy more of our oil. You heard that clip. We don't need your oil. He's a human ink blot at different tests at different times.
I mean, different times it could be within 2 different hours, and either he's focused on different issues or he's obsessed with different issues. And I listened to Andrew, and it really makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of thought that went into it, but I don't think that a lot of thought has necessarily gone into what Trump is thinking. And if you sit there and try to respond to some of it, whether it was this whole thing in the last 2 days about fentanyl and the millions of people crossing the border, including from Canada, if you sit there and you try to respond to each of the complete misinformation or the lie or the inaccuracy, however you want to describe it, you'll drive yourself crazy. But also, that's not a solution, because you're not going to point out to him that he's wrong. And the fact that he goes and speaks at Davos, and you would think there would be some cognitive dissonance, but again, that doesn't have an impact. It's, yes, there's a combination here. He really likes tariffs, and he thinks they're a solution to many things, including generating additional income for the government. He also thinks that Canada has gotten the advantage over the U.S. without being able to really articulate why. So he pushes and pulls from different areas and then points his finger. And so the real question is, and I think one of the reasons Doug Ford has come out looking good in the last month on a lot of this, is he doesn't sit there answering each of the specific accusations. He comes at it with a Team Canada approach, Team Ontario approach as well. He has the hat. He talks simply. He doesn't get into the rhetoric and the real weeds of each thing. He has focused on, this is going to be bad for Americans from day one. We heard Prime Minister Trudeau say that today. I haven't heard that enough of the message publicly, that Canadians who've gone on even American TV, they should be repeating that as arguments A, B, C, and D. This is going to cost Americans more. So that's really, I think, where the win will come from, is when Trump realizes that his base, American consumers, are going to land up paying more, and they're going to be angry about it. And then at some point, when that damage is done, maybe he'll back down.
James, rebutting everything he says is a bit like the arguing on the internet. It's just going to keep going, is the way it seems, right? But, Andrew Fury was on the show yesterday. He talked to Newt Gingrich at the inauguration, and Gingrich, the former speaker, said to him, tariffs are a revenue source for him. That's how he sees it. He wants it for money. If that is the true motivation and not just like border measures, that's a whole restructuring of the relationship and a much more difficult conversation to have, rather than what can we do about fentanyl, right?
When George W. Bush was president of the United States, the U.S. national debt was $1 trillion. Today, the U.S. economy adds $1 trillion in new debt every 100 days. And President Trump, right or wrong, but right or wrong in his mind, doesn't matter, views tariffs as a source of tax revenue that foreigners pay that is painless for the American economy. And of course, that's a narrative that needs to be flipped, as others have talked about. It's important for public policymakers, premiers, the government of Canada, to not react to things. I always tried when I was in cabinet to have a position which was always respond, never react. you call it reaction, but you respond, right?
Yeah.
Measure twice, cut once, be thoughtful and measured about these things. And so when Donald Trump speaks on Fox, or he does a press conference or a throwaway line across his desk as he's signing the executive orders, or even in his remarks at the World Economic Forum, just don't respond right away. Just take a measured approach and have your response in a day or two, and just kind of transact that way. Don't take the bait. Don't get overheated. Don't get over animated. And it's going to be particularly problematic for Canada to do so when you've got 7 people, but 2 real front runners, but 3 credible people running for the leadership of the Liberal Party, who, no matter what Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister says, they're going to have to try to hedge him and be a little bit more of this, or a little bit hotter that, or I would do it a little bit differently this way or that way. And then, of course, you have Pierre Poilievre, there's the leader of the opposition, who's going to be doing his job as chastising and presenting an alternative. And then you've got Doug Ford launching his campaign. So you're going to have all these voices reacting to Donald Trump because they're in the rubric of election campaigns. Meanwhile, Canada can have sort of a coherent, rational, respond, not react approach. And I think that puts Canada at a real disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andrew, James' advice here on respond, not react, is very similar to what we saw with Trudeau during Trump 1, right? Was the don't react to words, react to actions, right? It's a different version of it. It's harder for them to do that because when they tried to take that approach, they were accused of saying nothing and a leadership vacuum, and then the premier started filling it, and now it's the leadership race. And so this cacophony, just that slow, measured, diligent response may not be possible because of the politics domestically.
But I think a lot of people have learned, and I hope that this is one of the lessons the premiers have learned, that thinking out loud and ruminating about whatever their own individual, saving grace is for this, is actually simply weaponized by Trump. I mean, I feel bad for Danielle Smith. I never thought I'd say it, but I actually do feel kind of bad for her, having put her heart out there and exposing the Canadian oil industry and saying how great this was, and Trump slapping her back and going, "Don't care." This is, I think, where they've got to realize is that this is not, as James says, this type of reaction, this kind of sense that you can get these one-offs just isn't going to work with this guy. And we really do need that kind of Team Canada approach. The question will be, to what extent, though, do we need to be readying that response? And this was certainly one of the things that Doug Ford's team was telling folks in Ontario privately in meetings, is that they were very frustrated that that the federal government had not spent time thinking about what the countermeasures would be. The Ontario government had spent months. They said they started working on it back in March to understand what their response would be, what they thought the tariff should be, and how they would take that to Ottawa. And there was no receptive ear in Ottawa. So, I mean, this is part of the problem within the Federation. This is part of, I think, why you see Ford stepping up and going, hey, nobody else is here. I'm going to fill the vacuum. It's convenient. It also comes in advance of a number of political problems he's got domestically around the Green Belt and his budgets and a bunch of other things, that this is a good distraction for him. But I think that that's kind of what's fitting in, and this is hopefully a lesson that all the premiers have learned, which is be careful about what you're speculating on in public.
Shachi, your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree with that. And I would say that, we're also, the collective, we are also taking moments to maybe do things that are unhelpful. When the leader of the opposition puts out not an off-the-cuff statement in a scrum or a reaction to a reporter's question, but deliberately says things like Canada has never been so weak and out of control. How do you think that plays on the other side of the border? How do you think that plays in a Trump White House? Now, maybe Pierre Poilievre knows something that the rest of us don't know. Maybe he thinks that this is brilliant strategy. I think it is part of the problem. I said back in early November, as soon as that election was over, that we would probably not see the same level of coherent, united, pan-political Team Canada response that we saw the first time around. And that's because of the domestic political variations and machinations that are now playing out and coming to pass. But it just looks very ugly, very messy, and I don't see how it can possibly be helpful from a negotiating or a strength tactic at this stage.
Mm-hmm. No, Jonathan, partisans will put the blame on whoever they want, but there is something fundamentally broken in politics right now because people on other sides of the divide, they just don't talk to each other, try to understand each other, and agree with each other. So they can't pull together. The only place where you kind of see cross-partisan agreement is when the premiers meet with the premiers, because they're never going to run against each other, at least not in their current jobs, right? And this is a fundamental challenge with a guy like Trump who causes fractures, probes for weaknesses, and domestic and individual agendas are kind of getting in the way of collaboration and cooperation at kind of every level.
all else being equal, and it's not, and we're talking about politics here, but wouldn't it be great if Justin Trudeau could call Pierre Poilievre and say, come into my office, bring Jamil Javani with you. Let's sit down and figure out how we can get past the next couple of months, because this guy has special access. He can pick up the phone or he can fly down to Washington and have a straight conversation with J.D. Vance. And we can discuss how much J.D. Vance in the end is going to have an influence on Donald Trump or not. But, if all else was equal and we weren't in a political war zone, then maybe that could happen. Maybe the prime minister should do it anyways. I just don't see that offer being accepted. And, again, Shashi said it, we're not in 2017. Ron Ambrose played an important role with others in, NAFTA negotiations 1.0. And, unfortunately, Brian Mulroney has passed away, and he played a role in that. So, cross-partisan, bipartisan cooperation is a show of strength. We're just not in that reality anymore. And we can point fingers, but that's not actually a solution. I wish we could just find a solution, put down the guns for a short period of time and say, what's in the best interest of all Canadians? I think everyone would benefit because Canadians would applaud that, really from all corners. It's not going to happen.
But
James, 30 seconds on that, if you got. Or who was jumping in there? Was that Andrew?
It was Andrew.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I kind of agree with that, with the one exception that this isn't going to get settled quickly. This isn't a one-and-done situation with Trump. We are going to be in this for months, and I understand where, to a certain extent, Poilievre is at, which is why cooperate with this guy when he thinks he's going to be, the prime minister in 6 months, and is still going to have these problems to deal with. There's a sense of let's pull as much possible forward, because there's going to be a long time where we're going to have to sort out what to do with Trump. And I think as long as we've got that instability here, that's one of the problems that Canada's going to have.
No, you're not wrong on that. James, is day 4 of 1,461 days of the Trump administration, right? So yes, maybe Justin Trudeau, maybe Poilievre doesn't need to do it in the short term, but he might need this kind of support a year from now, 2 years from now. So do you think there's any world in which something like this can happen in the next 60 days?
Yeah, but I think Andrew's point is the apt one, right? President Trump, at any time, as he did with steel and aluminum, can invoke Section 232 tariffs and bring them down. Nothing is ever his fault. Nothing is ever a mistake. He is always the victim. And when it comes to being a victim, then he has powers at his disposal to go after the other. Even if you have a new NAFTA, the USMCA or the Kuzma Agreement it was a replacement of the old NAFTA agreement, and it's being violated by nature of this as well. So even if you get a new NAFTA, we have 4 years here where we're going to be riding the bull, and it's going to be complicated, and we are going to need everybody to have their best efforts forward. And we just kind of, as I said, respond, don't react. Be thoughtful, be linear, be long-term, build relationships with Marco Rubio, build relationships with Ambassador Hoekstra, deal with governors, deal with mayors, play the long game, be calm. This relationship has been the most prosperous in human history, and it'll survive any of these gyrations.
Okay, we just solved it. Good work, everybody. It's a productive Thursday. I want to thank the Power Panel, Andrew Thompson, Shachi Curl, Jonathan Kalis, and James Moore.